In early 1942, the sun of the Japanese Empire was at its zenith. From the shores of Wake Island to the jungles of Malaya, the Hinomaru, the flag of the rising sun, flew victorious. The Imperial Japanese Navy, the IJN, seemed an unstoppable force, its carriers having delivered a stunning blow at Pearl Harbor and swept aside Allied naval power across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In this torrent of conquest, new ships were constantly needed to press the advantage. One of these was a small aircraft carrier, a vessel not born to the role but converted for it, a ship named Shōhō. Her name, meaning auspicious phoenix, suggested a long and glorious life. Instead, she would earn a very different and far more tragic distinction. She was destined to be the first Japanese aircraft carrier to be found by the enemy, the first to be attacked, and the first to be sunk in the fires of World War II. Her short, violent life and sudden death in the Battle of the Coral Sea would become a chilling prophecy of what was to come for the empire she served. Our story begins not in a shipyard, but at a negotiating table. After World War I, the great naval powers were exhausted and eager to avoid another ruinously expensive arms race. The result was a series of naval treaties, including the London Naval Treaty of 1930, which placed strict limits on the number and size of warships, especially aircraft carriers. Japan, feeling constrained and disrespected by these limits, began to look for clever ways to work around them. One of their most ingenious solutions was the creation of shadow warships. These were vessels designed and built for a peaceful auxiliary purpose, such as submarine tenders or high-speed oilers, but with a secret. Their hulls, machinery, and internal structures were all designed from the keel up to allow for rapid conversion into light aircraft carriers should war become inevitable. One such vessel was the submarine tender Tsurugizaki. Laid down in 1934, she was designed to be a mothership for a flotilla of submarines, providing them with fuel, torpedoes, supplies, and a place for their crews to rest. On the surface, she was a legitimate support ship. But beneath the decks, the provisions for her second life were already in place. Her diesel engines were designed to be easily removed and replaced with more powerful steam turbines suitable for a carrier. The ship's structure included the foundations for an aircraft hangar and elevators. She was a carrier in disguise, waiting for the order to reveal her true form. That order came in 1940. As tensions with the United States escalated, Tsurugizaki was taken into the shipyard for her transformation. Her sister ship Takasaki would soon follow, eventually becoming the carrier Zuihō. The conversion process was extensive. The diesel engines were removed and replaced with a set of geared steam turbines, generating 52,000 shaft horsepower, giving the ship a top speed of 28 knots, or about 52 kilometers per hour. This speed was essential to keep up with the fast fleet carriers she would be expected to support. A hangar was constructed, and above it, a flight deck stretching 180 meters long and 23 meters wide, or 590 by 75 feet. She was fitted with 2 aircraft elevators to move planes between the hangar and the flight deck. For defense, she was equipped with 4 twin-mount 5-inch dual-purpose guns, capable of engaging both aircraft and surface targets, along with 4 twin-mount 25mm anti-aircraft cannons. In January of 1942, just a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor, her conversion was complete. The former submarine tender Tsurugizaki was officially reborn and commissioned into the Imperial Japanese Navy as the light aircraft carrier Shōhō. Her air group was small but potent, intended to consist of around 30 aircraft. This typically included a squadron of the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters for combat air patrol and a squadron of Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers for offensive strikes. She was not a fleet carrier like the mighty Akagi or Kaga, but she was a capable modern warship, ready to join the fight. By the spring of 1942, Japan's military leadership was looking for the next objective. They set their sights on Port Moresby, a key Allied base on the southeastern coast of New Guinea. Capturing Port Moresby would sever the lifeline between the United States and Australia, effectively isolating the continent and securing Japan's southern flank. The plan to capture it was codenamed Operation MO. It was a complex, multi-pronged operation involving an invasion fleet that would sail around the eastern tip of New Guinea and land troops directly at Port Moresby. To protect this vulnerable invasion force, the IJN assembled a powerful armada. The main striking power came from the Carrier Striking Force, led by Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi, with the formidable fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuihō-class at its core. Their mission was to find and destroy any American carriers that might try to interfere. A smaller separate force, known as the Covering Group, was tasked with providing direct air cover for the slow-moving transports of the invasion fleet. This group was commanded by Rear Admiral Aritomo Goto, and its primary aviation asset was the newly commissioned light carrier, Shōhō. This was to be her first major combat operation. On paper, the plan was sound. The Japanese fleets were powerful, and their crews were veterans, confident after months of uninterrupted victory. They sailed into the Coral Sea expecting to meet little effective resistance. They were wrong. American codebreakers had been listening. At Station Hypo in Hawaii, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team had partially cracked the Japanese naval codes. They knew the Japanese were planning a major operation, they knew the target was Port Moresby, and they knew the approximate timing. Acting on this intelligence, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, dispatched every available carrier to intercept them. This led to the formation of Task Force 17 under the command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. The heart of his force consisted of two of the U.S. Navy's precious few fleet carriers, the USS Lexington and the USS Yorktown. It was to be a history-making confrontation. For the first time ever, two naval fleets would fight a battle without ever laying eyes on one another. The entire battle would be fought at arm's length, by aircraft launched from the flight decks of carriers steaming hundreds of miles apart. It was a new kind of warfare, and the Coral Sea would be its bloody christening. As the opposing fleets entered the Coral Sea in early May, a tense game of hide-and-seek began. The weather was poor, with low clouds and rain squalls providing cover for both sides. The fog of war was thick. On May 6th, Admiral Fletcher received a report from one of his scout planes of 2 Japanese carriers and 4 heavy cruisers. He ordered a full-scale strike from both Lexington and Yorktown. It was a mistake. The scout pilot had misidentified the ships. The carriers were actually 2 Japanese light cruisers. The strike was a waste of precious fuel and ordnance. The Japanese were having their own problems. Their search planes were also struggling in the poor visibility. On the morning of May 7th, Admiral Takagi's scouts reported what they believed was an American carrier and a cruiser. He immediately launched a major strike from Shokaku and Zuihō-class. But again, it was a case of mistaken identity. The targets were not carriers, but the American fleet oiler USS Neosho and her escorting destroyer, the USS Sims. The Japanese planes fell upon the 2 hapless ships with predictable and brutal results. The Sims was sunk with heavy loss of life, and the Neosho was left a burning, drifting wreck. While these early blunders were taking place, another American scout pilot was about to change the course of the battle. At around 8 in the morning on May 7th, a scout plane launched from USS Yorktown flew over the Japanese invasion convoy, and there, steaming in the center of the formation, was an unmistakable silhouette, a Japanese aircraft carrier. It was the Shōhō. The American pilot's report electrified Task Force 17. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Admiral Fletcher wasted no time. He ordered a massive, all-out attack. In total, 93 aircraft were launched from the decks of Lexington and Yorktown. This formidable wave consisted of 53 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 22 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 18 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters to provide escort. They thundered into the sky, a swarm of steel and fury, all converging on a single point on the map. On the bridge of the Shōhō, Captain Izawa Ishinosuke was aware of the danger. He had launched his own small combat air patrol of 3 Zero fighters and 1 Kate to scout, but it was nowhere near enough to counter the storm that was gathering. The Japanese covering group, including the cruisers and destroyers escorting Shōhō, formed a circular screen around the carrier, their anti-aircraft gunners nervously scanning the skies. Just before 11 o'clock, the first American planes appeared. The attack came in two devastating waves, perfectly coordinated. First came the dive bombers from Lexington. They peeled off from high altitude, their engines screaming as they plunged almost vertically towards the frantically maneuvering carrier below. The Shōhō's anti-aircraft guns opened up, joined by the fire from the escorting warships, but the sky was filled with too many targets. The dauntless bombers were relentless. The first bomb hit near the aft aircraft elevator, buckling the flight deck and starting a massive fire. A second bomb struck the flight deck right on the center line, plunging through into the hangar below, where fueled and armed aircraft were being prepared. The result was a catastrophic internal explosion that tore the heart out of the ship. As fires raged across her deck, the second part of the attack began. Down at sea level, the torpedo bombers from both Yorktown and Lexington began their perilous runs. Flying low and slow, they were incredibly vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. But they pressed their attack with breathtaking courage. Torpedo after torpedo slammed into the hull of the doomed carrier. One hit disabled her steering, leaving her steaming in a circle, unable to evade. Another hit the engine room, and the ship began to lose speed, trailing a thick plume of black smoke. The Shōhō's own combat air patrol, a handful of Zeros, desperately tried to intervene, but they were overwhelmed by the escorting American Wildcat fighters. They were simply too few to make any difference. The assault was over in minutes, but the damage was absolute. The light carrier, designed with commercial compromises and lacking the heavy armor of a true fleet carrier, stood no chance against such a deluge of ordnance. She had been struck by at least 13 bombs and 7 torpedoes. She was engulfed in flames from bow to stern, her flight deck a twisted, burning wreck. The order to abandon ship was given. Captain Izawa, however, chose to remain on his bridge, determined to go down with his vessel, a tradition he held to in the code of Bushido. The Shōhō listed heavily to port, water pouring in through the massive holes in her hull. Just 8 minutes after the first bomb hit, her stern slipped beneath the waves. Her bow rose high into the air, a final, desperate salute to the sky, before she plunged downwards into the dark waters of the Coral Sea. The human cost was horrific. Of the ship's crew of 834 men, 631 were lost, including Captain Izawa. Only 203 men were pulled from the shark-infested waters by the destroyer Sazanami. As the surviving American planes returned to their carriers, a jubilant pilot from the USS Lexington, Lieutenant Commander Robert E. Dixon, radioed one of the most famous and succinct messages in the history of naval warfare. "Scratch one Flattop. Signed, Sinpak." The message, though perhaps embellished by legend, perfectly captured the moment. For the first time in the war, the seemingly invincible Imperial Japanese Navy had lost an aircraft carrier. The news provided a massive and desperately needed morale boost for the Allies. But the battle was far from over. The next day, the main carrier forces would clash, resulting in heavy damage to the USS Lexington, which later had to be scuttled, and significant damage to the USS Yorktown. The Japanese carrier Shokaku was also badly damaged by American bombs. In the immediate aftermath, the Japanese commanders made a critical decision. With the loss of Shōhō, their invasion convoy was now completely exposed to air attack. They had no choice but to turn back. Operation MO, the invasion of Port Moresby, was cancelled. Though the Americans had lost a larger carrier in the Lexington, they had achieved their strategic goal. Port Moresby was saved, and the advance of the Japanese Empire had been checked for the very first time. This strategic victory had another, even more significant consequence. The fleet carrier Shokaku was so badly damaged she would be out of action for months. Her sister ship, Zuihō-class, was undamaged, but her air group had been decimated in the fighting, losing most of its experienced pilots. The rules of carrier warfare meant a carrier was useless without its trained airmen. As a result, when the Japanese Navy launched its next, even more ambitious operation just 1 month later, an attack on Midway Atoll, these two powerful fleet carriers would be absent from the order of battle. Their absence at the Battle of Midway would prove to be a fatal blow to Japan's war effort, a turning point from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never recover. The story of the Shōhō is a short and brutal one. A A ship not born to be a warrior, she was pressed into service at the height of her nation's power, only to be consumed in the first major carrier versus carrier battle in history. Her fiery end was a tactical loss for Japan, but it led directly to a strategic victory for the Allies. She was the first domino to fall in a long and bloody line of Japanese carrier losses that would ultimately lead to their defeat. The auspicious Phoenix never had the chance to rise from the ashes. Instead, her sinking served as a grim warning, a signal that the tide of war in the Pacific was about to turn. We've seen how the loss of a single ship can have consequences that ripple across an entire theater of war. The story of the Shōhō is a testament to the brutal calculus of naval combat and the critical importance of naval intelligence. But what do you think is the most overlooked turning point in the Pacific War? A battle, a piece of technology, or a strategic decision that doesn't get the attention it deserves? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're always fascinated to read your perspectives. And while you're down there, if there's a particular warship, warbird, or battle you think needs its story told, let us know. Your suggestions are our mission briefings for future deep dives. If you enjoyed this look into a pivotal moment of naval history and want to ensure you don't miss our next investigation, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and activated notifications. It's the best way to support the channel and stay with us on our journey through the echoes of the past. Thank you for watching.